Now more than ever, you need technology you can rely on.
頼れる人ですよね。
I'm a Dell Technologies advisor.
Ich auch.
我也是。
我aussi.
And if you're a small business, we're with you.
We are with you.
Estamos com você.
We want to help.
So we'll be right here.
At home, answering your calls, providing support,
And standing by you every step of the way.
Bye-bye.
Let me introduce the moderator of the panel, and she's going to talk more about the panel itself, and that's Preethy Padman. So Preethy is the head of platform product marketing at Freshworks. And prior to joining Freshworks, she was a VP of marketing at Penzura. And she also is an angel investor with SV2 portfolio and a board member for Cortex BCI. She also serves on a lot of nonprofit boards and has worked in various other large companies such as Nutanix, Dell, and Cisco. She's an MBA from UCLA and a BITS planning graduate. So with that, I'm going to invite Preethy to take over the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everybody. Good morning and good evening from India. Thank you for joining us here today. I have the pleasure of moderating the Cloud VC panel, and I believe it's going to be a real fun one today. Our VCs here have tremendous experience for several decades, and they're going to share their journey on the past, present, and future of cloud. So let me get started and introduce our top 4 VCs here. I'll start with Madhu. I've known Madhu for about 2-3 years, and she moved from Singapore to Bay Area. Madhu Iyer is a partner at Rocketship Ventures. Prior to that, she was the chief data officer and board member at Gojek and helped grow the business to $1 billion as a unicorn. And prior to that, she was a partner at a $150 million private equity fund and also was in an operating role at Intuit QuickBooks prior to that. Thank you, Madhu, for joining us here today. Next, we have Arif Janmohamed, who's a partner at Lightspeed Ventures Partners, and he focuses on investments in the areas of cloud and data center technologies, enterprise, mobile, and SaaS solutions. Prior to Lightspeed, Arif was at Cisco as a corporate business development group head and at Novitas Capital, an early stage venture capital firm. Arif holds an MBA from Wharton, University of Pennsylvania, and a bachelor's in computer engineering from University of Waterloo. Welcome, Arif. Thank you for joining us. We look for a fun one from you. Next, I introduce Shirish Sathave is a general partner at Cervin Ventures, who's focusing on next-gen enterprise software, cloud-based software, networking, security, data analytics, storage, and systems. Prior to Cervin, Shirish was a GP across Formation 8, Khosla Ventures, and Matrix Partners. So he has a lot to share from across several VC firms. Prior to that, Shirish had a stellar operating career in tech firms such as Force Systems, Alteon, with successful exits. Shirish has a PhD in electrical and computer engineering from Carnegie Mellon and an MS from Virginia Tech and bachelor's from IIT BHU. Thank you, Shirish. And finally, we have Peter Wagner. Peter Wagner is the founding partner of Wing Venture Capital. He has over 25 years, he has led over 25 investments that have led to IPO or acquisition, including Blue Jeans Network, Cumulus, Nimble Storage, Fusion.io, Redback, Riverbed, etc. He currently works with exciting private companies which we will hear about shortly. Before founding Wing, Peter helped Axel Partners for 15 years as a managing partner. And prior to that, he worked in technology and consulting companies in several roles. Peter holds an AB in physics from Harvard College, summa cum laude, and an MBA from Harvard Business School, where he was a Baker Scholar. So welcome everybody to the panel. So let's start with some of the wins that you have had. So tell us about why. We'll start with the why on why you bet on certain cloud startups in the past, what worked and what did not. Peter, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. Morning, everybody. So, you know, the cloud is a really transformational force as it relates to new ventures, both in terms of product and what's possible there, and in terms of business model. And for me, one of the greatest examples I've been involved in and am still involved in is Snowflake. Snowflake, of course, is a cloud data platform, one of the most exciting enterprise technology private companies in existence today. We've been investors in Snowflake since the seed round, when it was just a couple of founders and no office yet. And at that time, their concept was really built around how they could transform data warehousing. The team had been responsible for a lot of innovation in data warehousing in their roles as architects at Oracle, and they saw the potential for the cloud to really address some of the difficult things around enterprise data warehousing and unlock the potential for scalable and accessible data analytics for a wide swath of enterprise customers. So that was really the product concept, and that's what we invested in. And that has turned out to be abundantly true. And I think that data revolution in the modern enterprise is running at full speed now, of course. The other thing that's happened, though, along the way, and which has really allowed this to be not just a great product, but a great business, is the impact of the cloud on the way this product can be brought to market. It is so much easier for customers to consume compared to what had been a very difficult experience around data warehousing projects previously, that they're able to get very rapid trial, deliver extremely fast time to value, and then enormous expansion rates as customers perceive that value and start to use it, not just for traditional analytical purposes, but today even in support of applications that are in production across a wide range of use cases. So, as we sit here in 2020, what started out as a cloud data warehouse has really become a cloud data platform, the most strategic layer in my mind in the modern enterprise's stack, and it's really just a beautiful expression of what the cloud, and specifically the public cloud, makes possible.
Thank you, Peter. That certainly is a wonderful journey of moving from a product to a platform, certainly a big wave that is taking over where you can make a bigger difference. And Snowflake is certainly a great example that several entrepreneurs can take forward into their own journeys. Thank you. Let's ask Shirish. Shirish, we've talked about several startups. Would love to hear your thoughts about Aviatrix or any other examples that you'd like to share.
Sure. So, we have been involved in the cloud business for a long time. When I was at Matrix Partners, we invested in HubSpot, which has really become the de facto alternative to Salesforce and companies such as Salesforce as a critical CRM tool, and continues to do amazingly well years and years after our investment. I think the cloud enables tremendous synergies and allows people to connect in a very unique way. And I think that has been the secret of HubSpot's success. At Khosla Ventures, I had a very interesting experience where I invested in Nutanix, which is not a cloud company. It was a company that was on-prem for the most part. However, the transition to the cloud was fascinating to watch. And the transition to the cloud has been not without its challenges. But I think in a company, that's an example of where a company starts on-prem, the transition to the cloud is not necessarily easy. I mean, obviously, the greatest example we have in front of us that none of us have invested in is Microsoft. But Nutanix has gone through in a much, much smaller way its own transition. We also invested in Square at Khosla, which is obviously only enabled by the cloud. Aviatrix is an interesting company. It's still early. It is not exited yet, and but it's growing rapidly. The only thing that had not happened in the cloud was networking. Networking was still stuck, I would say, in the old day, like the dark ages, if you will. And Aviatrix is bringing true inter-cloud and multi-cloud networking to enterprises. And I think you're going to see, and now of course people have realized that, and that's the reason why the company is growing rapidly. It's growing rapidly because the move to the multi-cloud is happening, where you need Aviatrix. Without Aviatrix, you can't really have a significant multi-cloud architecture. And companies such as the ones I mentioned are only possible because of the cloud. Absolutely.
And thank you for sharing multiple examples from across several firms that you've been in. And And I'm glad you invested in Nutanix. That's how I got to meet you in the first place when I was part of the company. Let's move to Arif from Lightspeed. Arif, would love to hear your journey across Lightspeed, several startups that you've invested in.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, like Shirish, like Peter, we've been incredibly early and lucky to have partnered with some amazing founders over the last, 10 to 12 years of the cloud journey. I'd say we're still relatively early in the transition to the cloud, but we've already seen some massive successes like what Shirish and Peter talked about. Lightspeed was also involved with Nutanix from the very beginning. We were involved with AppDynamics from the very beginning, also involved with MuleSoft, and more recently, companies like Rubrik and Netscope. And one company that I will highlight, which is a beneficiary on the first degree of the cloud adoption by companies, is Netscope. And so when we first got involved with Netscope about 8 years ago, at that point in time, I think Salesforce's market cap might have been in the order of 10 to 15 billion. I think Amazon's run rate on AWS was maybe it was touching about $1 billion, and the average number of SaaS applications that the average enterprise used was on the order of 2 to 3. Right. So in 2012, cloud was really just a twinkle. It was something that VCs talked about on panels, but it hadn't really taken hold in the broader enterprise, or really hadn't really been broadly adopted. But kudos to the founding team at Netscope, Sanjay Berry and Krishna Narayaswamy and Ravi Aital and Levin Chen, who really saw that, the future was going to be cloud first. If you sort of looked at what the world looked like in 2012, the average enterprise, large enterprise had, thousands of applications that were secured behind a firewall. They had thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of hosts or VMs that were sitting inside a data center. And they had a perimeter that was very, very strongly secured and fortified by companies like Palo Alto Networks or Checkpoint or even potentially Fortinet. But Sanjay's hypothesis was that as those applications really went outside the strong perimeter, as enterprises adopted SaaS, like a HubSpot, as Shirish talked about, or like a Salesforce.com, or like a ServiceNow, or like a Workday, that the security related to those applications would be less secure. And then as workloads moved into Amazon Web Services and Azure and Google Cloud Compute Platform, that the traditional box appliance vendors would be ill-equipped to actually secure those. And so now you fast forward to 2020, and it is absolutely true. The average number of SaaS applications that a company uses today is measured in the hundreds, if not the low thousands. The number of hosts that are sitting outside a data center and in the cloud is growing by the day. You can see this as exhibited in AWS's run rate in the tens of billions, as well as Azure. And the way that remote workers actually interact with their broader enterprise is over the broader internet. And so Netscope has first started by addressing the world of cloud SaaS applications by building a global proxy, almost a global firewall in the cloud, but has moved into securing all of your web traffic as well as your remote connectivity. So this is a company that's very exciting, still has a lot of legs to grow. It's a massive market. There's about $100 billion of market capitalization that'll shift from on-premise vendors such as a Palo Alto Networks or Checkpoint into next generation cloud vendors. And we're seeing Netscope really benefit from this.
Thank you, Arif. That was a lot of nuggets about several areas, right? SaaS is another piece that is certainly the great way forward for several startups that are looking to innovate, and all the different pieces you talked about Netscope. Thank you for sharing that. Madhu, would love to hear about a win story from you as we get kicked off here.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. We at Rocketship are, we are based out of Los Altos, but we are global investors. We invest in the Valley and we invest all over the world. So we've seen a lot of interesting trends, and dovetailing on many of the things that the previous panelists said, we've seen, we also have been past investors and seen the journey here. But internationally, it's been very interesting for us. There's a huge difference between how cloud startups are coming up here versus in Asia, for example. In Asia, there's been some sort of a leapfrogging, is what we've seen. Citizen services, real estate, banking, education, even deep tech. In agri-tech, things like that have sort of really leapfrogged in Asia. What has not changed in Asia is, a lot of the large commercial. So actually, what has not changed here is a lot of the large commercial businesses like construction, agri-tech. They're still, it still doesn't seem to be leapfrogging like Asia is. For us, we've seen a lot of activity, but one of our poster children as past entrepreneurs, we've all used, and data scientists, we've used massive amounts of data on the cloud. And so, we knew that this is going to be a trend that's here to stay. So we invested in a company called Wasabi. And Wasabi has just raised, $30 million last month, and got a huge COVID spike. It's a storage company, a cloud storage company, and really going head on head with AWS S3, which is why we thought that it was really interesting. 5 times faster at 1/6 the price. Shameless plug for Wasabi here, but it really, it is time for a lot of disruption from smaller players. And we are very bullish on this space, on this company, and also data as an entire sort of category vis-a-vis cloud. And not just in the US and in the Valley, but around the world.
Great. I think your points about the how the entrepreneurship is different in outside the US is certainly touching with what was shared with one of our keynote speakers, Amitabh, right this morning from Niti Aayog. So certainly resonates that thread on necessity driving a lot of different types of innovation, like you mentioned, agri and other areas. Thank you. So we already started getting audience questions. This is phenomenal. Thank you. But before we go there, I'd like to take a touch upon sales models. With cloud, there's been a huge shift in sales models for startups, and also how the startups enable their customers with different sales models. So Peter, would love to hear from you about those business transformations.
Sure, no, I'm happy to discuss this. When I first started in this, in the bad old days of enterprise selling, it was long sales cycles, direct sales efforts, 4-legged sales teams, painful onboarding, and customers were left in the position of paying large sums up front for products that they may or may not actually get value from. And you still see vestiges of that around the industry, but it's a declining share, and it's not where value is being created. And so what the cloud has enabled is a very different go-to-market model, not just for application companies, but even for hardcore infrastructure companies. So up and down the stack. And the beauty of it here, I think, is the opportunity to have absolute consistency between how your product is built and how customers are going to buy it and consume it. And if you don't have that consistency, you're really missing the opportunity and possibly fatally impairing your business. So it's easy to say, I want that lightweight, high velocity go-to-market model, which is so in vogue and have all kinds of great metrics that that attract investors. But if your product isn't built that way, you're wasting your time. So as usual, it all starts with product. And the best cloud-enabled businesses have products that can, in fact, be consumed very easily, deliver value proof points very quickly without a lot of intervention by the vendor. Mm-hmm. And the customer can see that and believe that, largely on their own. It might not be 100% self-service, but it's definitely not, a 4-month POC with SEs running all over the place. And so thinking about how you build your product to enable The sales model you want is, is the most important thing here. And if you get that right, then you have so much flexibility in terms of how you encourage trial of your product, generate leads that are worthy of being followed up by a sales team, probably over the phone, and being able to pursue the attack from below, where you don't need to do the 7-figure wall-to-wall deal on day one, which is the surest way to kill your pipeline that I've ever seen, but in fact can encourage a lot of usage, develop a lot of wins, and then build upon that. So that's really the art of the cloud. I think is it really comes down to the distribution model that's enabled, and you build the product to support that distribution model. That's how you're creating value.
Wonderful. I'm hearing the whole theme of being nimble, right? Nimble as a startup, nimble in your product, and how you're able to transform the business model over there. Thank you, Peter.
I mean, I'm not an investor in this company, but if you want to see a brilliant example, in addition, I mean, I spoke about Snowflake before, so I won't belabor that one. That's a brilliant example. But for another, you need look no further than Datadog. Datadog, if you want to study something about an efficient cloud-born go-to-market model, I would encourage you to go to school on that. There are more sophisticated products, no doubt, but there aren't many that are as tightly aligned with the go-to-market model as you see at Datadog.
Great, thank you, Peter. And Madhu, would love to hear a deeper dive on the pricing, piece that you talked about briefly on with respect to Wasabi or any other startup that you've invested in.
Yeah, I think, briefly, I'll say, and I'd love to hear other thoughts as well. But briefly, what I would really wish is for cloud startups to be more innovative around pricing. Traditional tiered SaaS pricing models, severely underprice the value that's being delivered. And this is something that AWS had to innovate a lot. And even at the cost of sort of having a very complex tiering price sheet. So, we are still seeing that struggle, and I'd love to hear some thoughts from the other panelists as well. But, the innovation around pricing and services, it's still a challenge, that I see in most startups.
Shirish, would you like to add to that? I see you.
Sure. I'll say a couple of things. So I think you have to figure out what value you're providing to the customer,
right,
and charge for value, not based on your cost, right? As in the old hardware or even software model. So because in the cloud, the marginal cost could be zero. It is possible that you're installing your software inside the customer's private cloud or the virtual private cloud. So your cost of running the product is zero. Obviously, there's no hardware, so the cost of the product is zero. So you have to decide what price you want to have, and the best comparison is compare other similar products and then have a discussion with the customer on what value they're getting out of it and what price you can charge for it. And it is better in many cases to charge per unit, because if you charge whatever the unit is, right? In the case of Aviatrix, it is per connection, right? If you charge per connection, then what happens is that you start small and then you grow, right? Speaking to the sales model, the best sales model is the one that the customer just installs the product on their own and start paying $1,000 a month, which is very low. And then we wait and watch. Nobody calls the customer. Once the customer starts paying $35,000, $40,000 a year, that's when you make the phone call, because that's when the CFO on the customer side says, what company is this? I don't know what they're doing. And if your champion cannot speak intelligently about the value that the company is adding, then you have a problem of churn. So what Aviatrix does is we just sort of wait until the customer starts doing $3,000 a month. And that's when we call them and say, let's have a discussion about our architecture. And so, but start small and grow with it. I mean, these companies, as they grow, you just automatically expand. You don't even have to do any work. So you don't have to necessarily start very high. In contrast, at Matrix, we were investors in Netezza, which was a $500,000 unit product, and it was a very difficult way to live. There was 2 quarters with zero revenue, and the third quarter had 15 million in revenue, followed by 2 more quarters of zero revenue. It is very, very, it is not good for your blood pressure.
Almost like a roller coaster ride.
Exactly.
Yeah, like going down, coming up, and going down. Yeah. So Arif would like to take a little bit of different question here for you. Talk about opportunities in the cloud, right? We have several areas that typically are across cloud: networking, storage, software, etc. And there's so many transitions in technology from mainframes to cloud, right? How has that transformation impacted these IT areas, and how do startups that are dialed in here work towards innovating in that direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. But my question is, what's a mainframe? I guess maybe some of the older guys like Peter and Shirish can tell me that what that is. I'm just teasing. So you know, where the world used to be was you used to have opportunities to really, you know, improve on compute, you know the bare building blocks, right? And so a lot of money was made by multiple firms in the 90s and early 2000s on the building blocks of what today people would call cloud. These are the core primitives of server or networking or storage. I would say today that's an area which is very hard to innovate in, really, because it, you know, competing against an AWS or an Azure or even Google Compute engine in terms of their ability to really continue to innovate in that area will be very hard for a startup. And so I think that what's happened is startups can actually play at a higher tier all the way up to the application tier. And there's a few things that they can ride, or a few trends they can ride. One, the marginal cost of storage has been driven down dramatically over the last decade. And what that allows for is a massive amount of data to be stored in the cloud. And so as data is stored in the cloud, and as storage and compute marginal cost goes down, the ability to process massive amounts of data has actually increased. And so what that lends itself is, whoever had on their bingo card AI, you know, now you get to cross it off. But truly, you know, the dramatically lowered cost of storage and compute in the cloud has allowed for brand new types of enterprise software to be built, that is built around machine learning, that's built around massive data sets, that's built around natural language processing. And that allows, in my opinion, for the next generation of contextual, personalized, model-driven enterprise software to be built. In the mid-tiers, and both Shirish and Peter talked about this or alluded to it, is the buyer has, or one of the fundamental buyers for infrastructure software has changed. It used to be, you know, in the olden days, a salesperson would go knock on the door of the head of IT, the CIO, wine her diner, you know, steak dinners, and maybe, you know, then they'd get $1 million to $2 million deal after a year of that. Well, the core decision maker now is a developer. And that's driven by, and that developer has access to a ton of open source projects. That developer has access to a ton of cloud primitives. And that developer has really become a fundamental decision maker, combined with the cloud operator. And that has led to the rise of the DevOps folks. And so there's a huge amount of opportunity in terms of redefining that middle tier, which is the interface between the application and the actual primitives that I talked about. And so if you think about where we're looking, it's really in that middle tier. It's things that cater to developers, and also as you move up, it's business application software, which is being transformed by, you know, these new AI ML type models.
Great. I think you actually invested in infrastructure layer, then you're talking about application layer and the middle layer. So there's so much opportunity for several people out here. So
yeah, and the gift that keeps on giving, sorry, Preethy, is of course security, and really thinking about how to secure every single layer of that stack as those stacks continue to change. Because as you have an application stack or an infrastructure stack that changes, the attack surface changes dramatically, and that means that security professionals can keep innovating and building great companies.
Yes, there are some questions on security coming up, so certainly a very key area to focus on. Shirish, would you like to add to that before we move to audience questions?
Sure. I think I'll just say a couple of things. I think the transformation from the mainframe, and by the way, does TiEcon have a HR department? I'd like to report Arif for ageism. Peter and I.
It's not ageism, it's experience, my friend.
I'm kidding. So the transformation from the mainframe to what we now call cloud computing has been an interesting one, right? The mainframe was essentially, if you think of it, a cloud, but we just had to buy the cloud and spend bazillion dollars on it before you can get any value from it. Now, but the thing that mainframe could not do is the dynamism of the cloud and the elasticity of the cloud, right? If you look at, there are companies, I'm an investor in a company that sometimes has hardly any compute going on at AWS. And there are times when we take over and we turn up thousands and thousands of EC2 instances, right? And it is impossible for this company to ever buy that many computers and just have them sitting there with the utility of like 2% or 5%. There's just no way you can fund that company and make that company viable, but the cloud allows it, right? But the transformation to the cloud has to be done carefully, right? And and the other thing that the cloud is doing though is the massive amounts of, and Arif talked about it, massive amounts of computing allowing you to analyze data at a very high rate. What's happening though is that the amount of data being generated across the landscape is increasing so much that data that is generated at the edges of the cloud or at the edges cannot be moved to the cloud because the network hasn't scaled, and it is unlikely to scale because the data is increasing faster than the network. It doesn't matter. You build a 5G network, it's not going to scale. So what you have to do then is do some analysis using AI or whatever at the edges, and then only move the inferences to the cloud so that all the edges can move their inferences, their localized inferences to the cloud for final analysis. And that's called federated learning. And you'll see more and more of that as data generated at the edges of the cloud increase. And that phenomena didn't exist in the old days at all, right? Because you didn't have that much data. Mm-hmm. And to Arif's point, when I was at Carnegie Mellon, we used to talk a lot about AI, and it was a technology looking for a problem. And the reason it was a technology looking for a problem is there's no data, right? And so you need data to have a relevant solution in AI. But now AI came along at the web scale companies, and they were looking for a technology to be able to analyze the data, and they found this old technology called AI that was perfect.
Yeah. And I can see how you talked about the distributed, data is so distributed, and intelligence now needs to reside in edge and cloud and all these areas of innovation. Thank you.
Yes. Just one of my follow-up comments to what Arif was saying was, that we feel bullishly that there is still a competition possible to AWS S3. There's a tremendous value proposition to be had to fight at the core capabilities. Again, to sort of Shirish's point about data and edge computing, and as the data is scaling at these massive amounts, sort of strengthening, having alternatives to these core capabilities, we think it's a compelling offer, being way faster, being much cheaper. Allows for many more startups to be using it, and so again, our bet for Wasabi is right at the heart of what can be done with the amounts of data that we have, and can it be done faster, and can it be done cheaper? That's really the bet. It's general purpose versus specific purpose also. So there's just a lot to be said.
Absolutely. There are about 6+ questions that have come, and those are like the top questions here. I'm going to rapid fire away because we want to make sure we get to the audience questions. And what I would like to do is maybe 1 or 2 people take each one. That way we are able to get to most of the questions. So the first one, will the future be hybrid cloud or 100% cloud? Who'd like to take that?
I can take it real quick. I believe at least for the next decade, we're not going to get to 100% cloud. There's just so much existing infrastructure, existing applications that have gravity. If you sort of take a step back, a lot of America's enterprises and business systems still run on mainframes, whether it's the mortgage industry or whether it's the airline industry. And so even though there was that shift to client server, not all of that has moved to client server. And just like that, as we move to the cloud, I doubt we'll hit 100% in the next decade.
Yeah, and I think, sort of dovetailing on what you just said, I think that the future will be 100% for certain verticals and hybrid for others. For example, just like you said, brick and mortar retail, mortgages, it's definitely going to be hybrid for it's going to be hybrid for a very long time. But for financial consumer applications, for example, now, I haven't been to a bank branch in a few months, in a few years, in fact. So I think that I'm a little bit more bullish on sort of it being 100% for certain verticals.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think as, we're talking to entrepreneurs here. So, while the hybrid environment will certainly persist from a new venture formation point of view, and for startups, focus on the public cloud. You don't want to be trapped in the evaporating water hole, fighting it out with the other alligators for a dwindling market. Go where the growth is, and that's the public cloud.
Excellent. Any thoughts on multi-cloud before we move off this topic?
I'll just say multi-cloud is happening for sure. And it's happening for a bunch of reasons. Sometimes it happens by accident, where a company acquires another company, and that company is using a different public cloud provider. And there's no way you can move the data to one place. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it happens by design. Adobe is a great example of that. Adobe on day one, they created all their different clouds, marketing cloud in AWS, some other cloud in Azure. They've done that for a long time. And there are companies that are smart. They figure out that they need to hedge their bets and have multi-cloud. And so that, I think multi-cloud is absolutely happening. And with the advent of Kubernetes, you'll see multi-cloud accelerating, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, another great area to innovate into. There's an interesting question here, which actually has been on the mind for several years, I would think, on people. How long till we see a plateau on cloud technology? Is there even going to be one? Peter, would you like to? I see you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see one. I think there's, for the time frame of interest that's relevant in technology, that I would really not worry about that. When's the internet plateau, right? It's sort of beyond the planning horizon.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think we're in the early stages. We're still in early stages of what people call digital transformation, or just this massive shift away from things that have been built up over the last 30 to 40 years to the cloud. So I don't see any plateaus anytime soon.
I think it is useful to think about what cloud is, though. And this doesn't mean that when we say cloud, we're talking about the thing that AWS launched in 2006. There's rapid evolution in what the public cloud really means, whether it's the move to multi-cloud or the whole edge phenomenon, which Shirish was talking about. I mean, I think edge cloud integration and how we take advantage of that level of distribution is going to be a new thing, and will redefine how we think about cloud. So there'll be many disruptions like that continue to force us to rethink what cloud is, and that's opportunity for entrepreneurs.
Talking about opportunities, there is a question on security, which we touched upon earlier. I'll quickly mention what is top of mind here. The question is about what are some of the security issues emerging in the current global scenario, and what measures are needed across the threat life cycle, for response, remediation, and what are some opportunities there, if anybody wants to talk to that.
Sure. I would encourage security entrepreneurs to start with the data. Data is the foundation of the modern enterprise. The data platforms are the most strategic technology decisions that enterprises are making. Next generation applications are all rooted in unique data sets that they can gather or even generate, and the insights that they can extract to steer a business process. Infrastructure is about increasingly guaranteeing the availability of data, fast access to data, global distribution of data, and the same is true for security. So I think a data-first posture, as you think about new security products, is going to put you high on the priority list. It's not to say there aren't other things to do. I mean, there are, security is a great area. we're very active investors in it. You know, the move to cloud native, the move to edge computing, the rise of IoT, these all create new security opportunities. AI itself is a new point of vulnerability. You know, our dependence upon models, which in some cases are being retrained in production, or the ability to fool models by reverse engineering their bias. You know, these are all new possible exploits, and so I think, you know, that there's plenty of good work to do there. But if you have the data as your North Star, as a security entrepreneur, you're likely to be on the right track.
Great point, Peter. I came across a startup that was innovating in making sure the data in the Teslas and other cars are safe, because it is even possible to take control of that, you know, if you don't have protection there. So,
well, think of the models that a self-driving car is dependent upon. And it is not all that difficult to understand how those models make decisions. And so if you then present that model with circumstances that play to the bias that even the data scientists that developed it are probably unaware of, there's an opportunity for havoc. I don't want to sound too alarmist, but you know, as we become dependent upon these types of technologies, we need to understand, everything that could go wrong.
Yeah. There is a. Oh, go ahead, Shirish. You wanted to add?
I just wanted to say one quick thing. I think with the advances in AI, some negative things and bad things can happen. For example, deepfake videos, right? And security. Nobody talks about a couple of aspects of security. Figuring out deepfake videos for what they are, I think, is a key unsolved problem that people are trying to work on. There are some attempts at it, but I think that's an area in security that needs to be worked on. Another one is that if you have data in the cloud and you encrypt it, it's impossible to analyze, right? And it's impossible to analyze because you have to first decrypt it. If you decrypt it in the cloud, then obviously it is insecure unless you have some other measures to take care of it. So there's two ways to solve that problem, which is to either have homomorphic encryption, which is a form of encryption where you can analyze without decrypting. The problem with current homomorphic encryptions are they're extremely slow, extremely slow. And so it doesn't really scale. Now, there are a few companies that are trying to fix that. Another way to solve the problem, and I encourage companies to start, and entrepreneurs to take advantage of it, is that every processor that Intel ships contains today what is called a TPM, trusted execution environment, I would say. And that is a piece of hardware that is inside the processor that is highly secure. And companies that take advantage of that so that you can move data to be analyzed in its encrypted form to the trusted execution environment, decrypt it there, analyze it and move it back is a technology that Intel supports and Linux supports, but I don't see any, at least I have not seen any startups innovating in that area.
Mm-hmm. Great areas to innovate and great opportunities. Thanks for sharing, Shirish. The next question is about flexible cloud pricing. There's a startup that's interested in structured pricing that's structured flexibly so they can scale up proportionately as they are bootstrapped. You know, how do you make the pricing more flexible? Are there any examples that you can share from companies doing that? I can reread the question. Can future cloud pricing be structured flexibly to scale up proportionately to make it affordable as a bootstrapped startup scales up? Is there any?
I think that's probably potentially more of a question for the folks that own the infrastructure, you know, the AWSs and Azures than us. They control the primitives, and so I think that's something that they need to address, not us, unfortunately.
So Wasabi, you know, and I can take that question in a high level where Wasabi is pricing today per gigabit or petabit, you know, petabyte. So exactly by the value that's being delivered. So there is flexibility, but then we have not. And again, it goes back to the the question I had raised on pricing and how there's a lot more innovation that's required. Wasabi offers a lot, a lot faster access time, but that value is being captured in the use cases, but not in the price. So, I know I'm not answering the question in the optimistic way that I probably should have, but we've not cracked this yet, which is the reason sort of I was, talking about the fact that there's a lot more innovation that's required. How are you really, so the value is being captured in the use cases, but it's not being captured certainly in the pricing today. and there's some ways to go there.
Well, I'll take this opportunity to do a shameless plug because Freshworks is giving $4,000 in credits to all the TiE members. So you can head over to the Freshworks booth and get that offer. All right. Let's go back to talking about the new normal here, right? Any advice with this current scenario for founders raising capital during these tough times? So anybody who would like to take that?
Be flexible on the valuation. I think these have been great times for cloud startups. But we really do think that flexibility on valuation, on valuations, on money, the cap table. Of course.
I'll just say quickly, we all had to adapt. When COVID first hit and we all locked down, I asked myself, is it possible for me to actually make an investment in a company without ever meeting the founding team in person, right? And I struggled with that because my philosophy has always been to get to know the entrepreneurs. Even though I never visited in a startup without going and visiting them at their location, because I can read the chemistry in the room and see how they interact with each other. And I've been to places that look like, there are undertaker's office. Right? I don't invest in those, right? And so how am I going to adapt? And that's a question that we all have to answer, right? I mean, I think we will answer it, and we have actually already answered it, where we have made an investment without actually meeting the entrepreneur at all, right? But it was a tough one, right? And I think we would have gotten there a lot faster if we could take these guys out for dinner and get to really know them.
So actually, here is a shameless plug for Rocketship. We started in 2014. We are using data-driven models, and I can say that every single investment that we have made has been global and has been over a Zoom call or a whereby call, and we have not met 70 to 80% of the entrepreneurs that we've invested in, and our portfolio, shamelessly again, has done really well, and so we've been getting on a lot of calls with a lot of people to. Fellow colleagues asking us how we've been able to sort of do our due diligence over a Zoom call, 2 meetings, so this has been a very, and it's terrible to say fortunate, but we have been able to sort of see a lot of tailwinds because of our operational style.
I think Madhu's comment brings up an important point, though. In fact, I think founders need to keep this in mind, that there's, broadly speaking, 2 types of investors: the before it's obvious investor and the after it's obvious investor. The after it's obvious investor makes their decisions based on observable metrics and calculates ratios, plugs it into the model. Machine says yes. The before it's obvious investor focuses on opportunities that don't have metrics yet. And that's classic early stage venture capital. This is where the die is cast. This is where the foundation is built. It's no place for amateurs. And so if you are in the before it's obvious phase of company development, when you're organizing your initial team, you're fine-tuning strategy, you're developing product, you're engaging with that first set of customers to get feedback, not to get purchase orders. You need an investor that specializes in that phase and can help you in that phase. So really, as you do your fundraising, consider who you're talking to. If you're a before it's obvious company, don't waste time with after it's obvious investors, and get the help you need for the phase that you're in.
Yeah, that's great advice, Peter. We had to pivot our model to deal with exactly what Madhu has had 6 years to learn, but I'm really humbled by how we've been able to do several investments over the last 4 months completely over Zoom. So we've adapted. We're multi-stage. I spend my time on early stage, so I like to think of myself as a before it's obvious type investor. But that just means that I've had to invest more time sort of in these types of meetings, because when you're in 2 dimensions, there's a lot of body cues and body language that is lost. We can't even look each other in the eye over Zoom. It's just very, very difficult to do. And so that for me personally has just meant to get to yes on investment is more time spent with the founder and more time really just not just talking about the business, but really understanding what makes that founder tick, and where that founder wants to go. So notwithstanding the COVID challenges, notwithstanding the fact that we're all remote, notwithstanding the fact that we may go into a recession, I'd say that a lot of investors are still open for business. Many of them are. I'd say that for great entrepreneurs with big ideas that are attacking, areas of the stack that are up for grabs, I'd say there is plenty of capital available to go after great investors. And it just might take a little bit more time than it did pre-COVID, when you were able to meet over a coffee and at a downtown University Avenue, or over a Zoom, to Madhu's point, from Silicon Valley to India.
I think one of the things I will say is the before it's obvious investors. We are $150 million AUM fund, so we can't invest in extremely obvious cases. So we've actually then what we've done is we've had to depend on extremely data-driven models that look for a flying spin wheel, if you will, to see across different cohorts. What are the metrics, before it's even really obvious, what's sticking, what's not.
You're looking at metrics, right? You're talking about flywheels. This obviously would not work for a company that doesn't have a product in the market, right?
True.
So that's that's part of the core issue, right?
Yeah.
I think Peter, I know what you're talking about. You invest in companies where the product doesn't exist for 2 years,
right?
Hopefully 18 months, but sometimes 2 years. And Arif, I am on the board of such a company, right? Nothing has happened for a long time. And
hey, a lot has happened, but
yeah, I know, but nobody's paid us. Right?
Well, I know this is getting heated up, and
I'm always pleasantly surprised when somebody pays out my company for the first time, and that has not happened yet. But
we jokingly call these are quote overnight successes, 8 years in the making, right?
Absolutely. So I'm hearing a lot of patience, adaptability, flexibility, connecting more, those are the train of thoughts across the board. So let's, we are almost at time. Let's finish on a positive note. A couple of things. One is, what do you like to do for fun right now? And what is your final sentence for our audience here? Shirish, would you like to go first?
Yes, I love hiking, and I've taken up hiking even more energetically in this era. And I like to do it alone because it clears my mind. It gives me time to think clearly, not about which startup to invest in, but just in general to sort of organize my thoughts around how I'm going to spend either the rest of the day or the rest of the week. And as a side effect, I also get some exercise. The one sentence I leave, one phrase I would leave to entrepreneurs is: be optimistic, be innovative, as always, and don't give up. It's hard to be optimistic these days, but I think that's the best thing. That's the only thing we can do.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. Peter, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. So, well, normally one of the main things I do for fun is I sail competitively. So I'm a member of a racing team called Skeleton Key Racing. You can check us out online if you want. That's been hard to do during the pandemic. Most of the events have been canceled. So I think these days for fun, I mostly play with my dogs, two very cute Australian Shepherds.
Very nice. Thank you, Peter. And do you have anything, any final word or a sentence that you would like to share?
Yeah, I would encourage entrepreneurs to really focus on building that foundation right before they get too concerned about scaling or chasing milestones or metrics. But where the die is cast is when that foundation is built. And if you do it right, a lot of things are easy later. And if you do it wrong, it's very difficult to reset, key early decisions. So take the time and get the help you need when you're building that foundation to set the stage for future greatness. Don't skip those steps.
Yeah, very true. Madhu?
So I also, like Shirish, love hiking and running, and I also like to do it alone for the same reasons. So this has been enlightening, Shirish. We can't hike together, but we will do it in parallel. I just was reminiscing my trips to Yosemite, where I've done the Half Dome multiple times, and now just kind of my own neighborhood hikes. And I think one of the things that I will leave the entrepreneurs around the room is with a fascinating conversation I had with an LP yesterday who said that the best 5 years are the next 5 years, and there's a lot of positivity, and I think we need it in these uncertain times. I think every generation has its moments and its glory, and this is it for every entrepreneur around the table.
Great, thank you. Arif, last but not the least, final word.
Yeah, in my spare time before the pandemic, I used to play ice hockey. So that has gone away. I'd say the blessing here is I get to spend so much more time with my kids, and I'm really lucky that they're still young and they still are home. And so I've been, teaching my older one how to program, and teaching them both how to play chess, and playing a lot of board games and card games with them, which has just been unbelievably rewarding and a great bonding experience for all of us. I was going to say something along the same lines as Madhu, which is, even when it's darkest, out of the darkness comes light. And if you look at some of the greatest companies over the last decade, they were born after the global financial recession, whether that was Nutanix or AppDynamics, or you go down the list, Datadog. A lot of the today's winners, even Okta, were born in very, very difficult times. And so although times are difficult, it's a time to be reflective about what the opportunity is over the next decade. And so I'd encourage entrepreneurs to think big, to think long-term, and to really keep the bar high in terms of the people that they bring to the table. And if you do that, then 10 years from now, you will look like an overnight success, to use Peter's words.
Thank you. And I'll hand over to Paul to wrap up the session.
What a great session. Thank you, Preethy. And it was great to see the little controversy going there, which always is very interesting. And the thing that was very interesting to me is that usually in most of the Zoom conferences, I see that most of the people who start drop off. And interestingly, I think only one person dropped off from the whole call, and it's still going strong. So thank you, everyone. Really, really appreciate it. And obviously the next up is going to be the TiEcon, and we hope to see you all at TiEcon. So thank you very much.